Clay Benton thought the town was empty, until he heard laughter from the graveyard and a bullet whizzed past his head from behind a tombstone. The desert wind howled like a banshee, whipping sand into Clay Benton's face until his eyes watered. He pulled his tattered hat lower, the grit stinging his skin. Days he'd wandered, searching for any sign of civilization, his canteen near empty. Just when his hope began to fade, a smudge appeared on the horizon. Squinting, Clay saw it buildings, a town. He urged his weary horse onward, the promise of water and rest driving him. As he drew closer, a strange stillness settled over him. The town looked perfect, too perfect. Houses stood in neat rows, their paint fresh. Candles flickered warmly in the windows, casting a welcoming glow, but there wasn't a soul in sight. Clay dismounted, his boots crunching on the clean, swept street. Where was everyone? Had they all left? A shiver ran down his spine despite the desert heat. There was something deeply unsettling about this place. He considered turning back, but the lure of shelter was too strong. He decided to risk it, hoping to find answers or at least a full water skin before nightfall. He led his horse towards the largest building, a saloon with swinging doors that stood slightly ajar, a silent invitation into the unknown. The swinging doors creaked open as Clay pushed them wider, the sound echoing unnaturally in the silent town. Inside, the saloon was just as pristine as the street outside. Tables were neatly arranged, cards lay scattered as if a game had been interrupted mid-hand, and glasses sat sparkling behind the bar. A layer of dust should have coated everything, but there was none. It was as if time had stopped. He ran a hand across the polished bar top, feeling a strange coolness. The air hung heavy, thick with an unspoken dread. The candles on the tables flickered with a light that didn't quite feel real, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to watch him. He walked further in, his boots thudding softly on the wooden floor. He noticed a piano in the corner, its keys gleaming. He touched one, and a clear, haunting note rang out, abruptly cutting through the silence. The sound made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. He quickly pulled his hand away, feeling as though he'd disturbed something. This town wasn't just empty, it was waiting for something or someone. He had to figure out what, and fast. Despite the growing unease, Clay's stomach rumbled. He hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. He decided to risk a quick search for supplies. Behind the bar, he found a mostly full bottle of whiskey and some dried jerky. Not a feast, but enough to keep him going. He poured himself a shot, the amber liquid warming his throat as it went down. He found a small room behind the saloon, likely a storage area. Inside, there were blankets stacked neatly on a shelf and a cot in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was better than sleeping on the hard ground. He spread a blanket on the cot and laid down, closing his eyes for a moment. The silence pressed in on him, broken only by the occasional creak of the building. He knew he couldn't stay here long, but for now, he needed rest. He chewed on a piece of jerky, the salty taste a small comfort. He told himself he would leave at first light, but a part of him knew he was lying. Something was keeping him here, a dark curiosity that he couldn't ignore. He drifted off to sleep, the image of the empty town and the flickering candles burned into his mind. Clay tossed and turned in his sleep, plagued by strange dreams. Whispers echoed in his ears, and shadows danced in the corners of his vision. He dreamt of faces, pale and gaunt, staring at him with empty eyes. He awoke with a start, his heart pounding in his chest. The saloon was darker now, the candles burning low. He sat up, listening. The silence was still there, but it felt different, heavier. Then he heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from outside. He held his breath, trying to pinpoint the source. The scratching grew louder, closer. It sounded like fingernails dragging across wood. He slowly reached for his revolver, his hand trembling slightly. He crept towards the door, peering through a crack in the wood. He saw nothing. Just the empty street, bathed in the pale moonlight. He told himself it was just his imagination, the product of a restless sleep. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He went back to the cot, his revolver clutched tightly in his hand, and waited for dawn, the scratching sound still echoing in his ears. The first rays of dawn crept through the cracks in the saloon walls, painting stripes of pale light across the room. Clay sat up stiff and sore, the revolver still clutched in his hand. He listened intently, but the scratching sound was gone. He told himself it had been a bad dream, amplified by the strange atmosphere of the town. He stood up and stretched, his muscles aching. He needed to get out of here to put some distance between himself and this unsettling place. He walked to the door and peered out. The street was still empty, the houses silent. But something was different. The candles that had been burning so brightly the night before were now extinguished, leaving dark pools of wax on the windowsills. As he watched, a figure emerged from the shadows at the end of the street. It was a man, but he moved with an unnatural gait, his head tilted at an odd angle. Clay squinted, trying to get a better look. As the figure drew closer, he saw its face. It was pale and gaunt, with empty, lifeless eyes. And then another figure emerged, and another until the street was filled with them, the dead, returned to life. Clay realized he wasn't just trapped in an empty town, he was trapped in a nightmare. Panic surged through Clay. He slammed the saloon doors shut, shoving a heavy table against them for good measure. The undead figures shuffled closer, their moans echoing through the wood. He knew the barricade wouldn't hold for long, he had to escape. He scrambled to the back of the saloon, searching for another way out. He found a small window high up on the wall. It was too small to climb through, but maybe he could break it. He grabbed a chair and smashed it against the glass, shattering it into jagged pieces. He quickly cleared away the remaining shards, wincing as a sliver of glass cut his hand. He boosted himself up and squeezed through the window, landing hard on the ground outside. He was now in a narrow alleyway behind the saloon. The undead hadn't found him yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time. He had to find a weapon, somewhere to defend himself. He ran down the alleyway, the sound of his boots echoing in the narrow space, hoping to find some way to survive this nightmare. He glanced back and saw the figures beginning to pour out of the saloon. The chase was on. The alley opened onto a wider street, lined with more silent houses and shops. Clay darted across the street, dodging behind a water trough. He risked a glance back. The undead were still coming, their slow, relentless pace terrifying. He needed to find somewhere to hide, somewhere with a weapon. He spotted a general store across the street, its door slightly ajar. He sprinted towards it, pushing the door open and slipping inside. The store was filled with dusty shelves, stocked with everything from canned goods to farming tools. He scanned the shelves frantically, searching for something, anything, to defend himself. He found an axe leaning against a wall, its blade glinting in the dim light. He grabbed it, hefting its weight in his hands. It felt solid, powerful. He also found a box of shotgun shells behind the counter. He didn't have a shotgun, but maybe he could find one. He heard the moans of the undead getting closer. They were coming. He had to move, and quickly. He grabbed the axe and the shotgun shells and ran towards the back of the store, hoping to find another way out, or at least a shotgun. The back room of the general store was cluttered with crates and barrels. Clay rummaged through them, desperate for a shotgun. He found an old rifle, but it was broken. He cursed it under his breath. The moans of the undead were getting louder, closer. They were inside the store. He spotted a small door in the corner, leading to what looked like a root cellar. He threw it open and scrambled down the steps, pulling the door shut behind him. The cellar was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of earth. He could hear the undead shuffling around in the store above, their moans muffled by the thick wooden floor. He fumbled around in the darkness, trying to find a light. His hand brushed against something cold and metallic. He pulled it out. It was a lantern. He fumbled with the flint, and after a few tries, the lantern flickered to life, casting a dim, yellow light across the cellar. He saw shelves lined with jars of preserved food, and in the corner a wooden chest. He went to the chest and opened it. Inside, he found an old, leather-bound journal. He picked it up, his heart pounding. Maybe, just maybe, this journal held the answers he needed to survive. Clay opened the journal, its pages brittle and yellowed with age. The handwriting was faded but legible. He began to read, his eyes scanning the lines with growing horror. The journal told the story of the town, once a thriving settlement built on greed. Years ago, the town's founders had made a pact with a dark entity, a being of immense power, in exchange for prosperity and wealth. The entity granted their wishes, and the town flourished beyond their wildest dreams. But the price was steep. The journal described how, over time, the entity began to demand more and more, slowly corrupting the town and its people. Eventually, the entity demanded their souls. The town refused, breaking the pact. In its fury, the entity cursed the town, condemning its inhabitants to an eternal half-life. They would die, but they would not stay dead. They would walk the earth as undead, forever trapped in the town, reliving their final moments. The journal ended with a desperate plea, a hope that someone someday would find a way to break the curse and release them from their torment. Clay looked up from the journal, his mind reeling. He now knew what he was up against. He wasn't just fighting the undead, he was fighting something far more sinister. Clay flipped through the remaining pages of the journal, his fingers trembling with anticipation. He needed to know how to break the curse, how to stop the undead. Finally, he found it, a passage detailing the only way to lift the curse. The journal explained that the entity's power was tied to a sacred artifact, a golden cross blessed by a long-forgotten saint. The cross was hidden somewhere in the town's church, the only place the entity's influence couldn't fully penetrate. Only by using the cross in a specific ritual could the curse be broken and the undead put to rest. The ritual required reciting an ancient prayer and holding the cross aloft during the darkest hour of the night. It was a dangerous undertaking, but it was the only hope for the town and for Clay himself. He closed the journal, his mind racing. He knew what he had to do. He had to find the golden cross and perform the ritual. He had to get to the church. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the task ahead. He grabbed the axe, the lantern, and the journal and prepared to leave the cellar. The undead were still shuffling around upstairs, but he had a purpose now, a mission. He wasn't just trying to survive, he was trying to save a town. Clay cautiously opened the cellar door, peering into the general store. The undead were still there, shuffling aimlessly among the shelves. He took a deep breath and charged out, swinging the axe with all his might. He took down 2 of the undead before they even knew what hit them. He dodged and weaved through the store, using the shelves as cover. He had to be quick, efficient. He couldn't afford to get surrounded. He reached the front door and kicked it open, bursting out into the street. The town was even more overrun than before. The undead were everywhere, their moans filling the air. He could see the church in the distance, its steeple silhouetted against the dark sky. It was his destination, his only hope. He started running, dodging the undead, swinging the axe whenever they got too close. He had to reach the church no matter the cost. As he ran, he noticed something strange. The undead seemed to be avoiding certain areas, particularly around the town square. He wondered why. He didn't have time to think about it now. He had to keep moving, keep fighting. The church was getting closer. He could almost feel the hope radiating from it. He just had to make it there alive. The closer Clay got to the church, the denser the horde of undead became. They seemed to be drawn to the church as well, as if guarding it. He had to fight his way through them, one by one. He swung the axe with a practiced ferocity, each blow felling another undead creature. He was running low on stamina, his muscles burning with exhaustion, but he couldn't stop. He had to keep going. He reached the churchyard, a small, overgrown patch of land surrounding the church. The gate was locked, but he didn't have time to find the key. He kicked it down, the wood splintering under his boot. The church loomed before him, its windows dark and empty. He could feel a sense of dread emanating from within, but also a faint glimmer of hope. He ran towards the entrance, the undead hot on his heels. He reached the door and threw it open, stepping inside. The church was dark and silent, the air heavy with the scent of incense and dust. He raised the lantern, casting a dim light across the interior. He saw rows of pews, an altar, and a stained glass window depicting a saint. He was finally here. Now he just had to find the golden cross. The fight was not over yet, it had just begun. Clay searched frantically, his lantern illuminating the church's interior. He checked behind the altar, under the pews, even inside the confessional. Finally, he spotted a small wooden box hidden behind the stained glass window. He pried it open, and there it was, the golden cross. As he reached for it, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a tall, gaunt man dressed in a tattered suit. His eyes glowed with an unholy light. Clay recognized him from a faded photograph in the saloon, the town's former mayor, now an undead guardian of the curse. The mayor lunged at Clay, his hands reaching for the cross. Clay dodged, swinging the axe. The mayor was fast, surprisingly agile for an undead creature. They fought, the axe clanging against the mayor's decaying flesh. Clay knew he couldn't defeat the mayor in a straight fight. He had to use the cross. He pulled it from the box and held it aloft, reciting the ancient prayer from the journal. The church began to tremble, and the mayor recoiled in pain. Clay continued the prayer, his voice growing louder, stronger. The mayor screamed, his body writhing in agony. The ritual had begun. The curse was about to be broken. The mayor continued to scream, his body dissolving into dust as Clay recited the final words of the prayer. The golden cross pulsed with a warm, golden light. The church stopped trembling, and a sense of peace settled over the room. Clay looked around. The remaining undead figures that had followed him into the church were now fading away, their forms becoming translucent before disappearing completely. He stepped outside into the churchyard. The town was changing. The dark clouds that had hung over it were now dissipating, revealing a sky filled with stars. The moans of the undead were gone, replaced by the gentle sound of the wind. The houses no longer seemed menacing, but rather peaceful and welcoming. He walked towards the town square and he saw them, the spirits of the town's former inhabitants, freed from the curse. They smiled at him, their faces filled with gratitude. They were finally at peace. He had done it. He had broken the curse. The town was finally free. He watched as the spirits faded away, ascending to a better place. The town was quiet again, but this time it was a peaceful quiet, a quiet of rest, not of dread. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky with hues of orange and gold, Clay walked towards his horse, which had miraculously survived the night. He mounted, his body aching, his mind still reeling from the events of the past few hours. He looked back at the town one last time. The houses were bathed in the warm morning light, the church steeple gleaming in the distance. The town was no longer a trap, a nightmare. It was a place of peace, finally free from its torment. He knew he could never forget what he had witnessed here, the horrors he had faced, the burden he had carried. He was no longer the same man who had stumbled into this town. He was changed, hardened, but also filled with a sense of purpose, a knowledge that even a drifter could make a difference. He turned his horse towards the rising sun and rode away, a lone figure silhouetted against the dawn. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he would carry the memory of this town with him, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope could prevail. He rode off into the sunrise, ready to face whatever the future held, a true hero of the West.